This is the Studio.H Dual Programmable Oscillator DPO. It's also commonly referred to as the 258E. And if you're familiar with the 258 or one of its clones, you might recognize the crazy effects you get when you really start ratcheting up the FM. This is a really fun module. It's capable of so many wonderful things. Sounds amazing, easy to use, really powerful. So let's explore it. So this module is made by Studio.H, which is Doug Clotter, and it fills a real gap, I think, in the Buchla ecosystem. So this module, as said, is the Dual Programmable Oscillator, or DPO, not to be confused with the Make Noise DPO. And like I also said, it's often called the 258E. And that's for the two reasons that it is inspired by the original 258. And the E, of course, means that it supports the 200E preset bus. So all of the features of this module are stored in a preset, which is where that's one of the really big advantages of this. Because unlike the 258, which requires you to patch, the two oscillators to each other, the 258E or the DPO is normaled. So you set up a modulation, and you can cross-mod the two oscillators and store that in a preset. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let me tell you about this module. So first of all, this is 100% analog. No digital in it. No digitally controlled oscillators. All analog. And it is two oscillators, an A and B. So oscillator A on the left and oscillator B on the right. Each oscillator has two audio outputs and three CV inputs. One for modulation index, one for wave shape, and then one for frequency CV input, like for pitch. It also has MIDI support, so it will work on the MIDI bus if you have a 225E or a 225H. And in MIDI mode, the frequency knob works as an offset, so that's pretty neat. I don't have MIDI in my setup right now, so I can't demonstrate that, but it's a pretty cool feature. Each oscillator features hard sync and soft sync, so you can get that the Cars sound if you're going for that. And each oscillator has a primary wave shape that morphs to another wave shape. So oscillator A goes sine to saw, and oscillator B goes sine to square. Both oscillators have an audio FM input, just like on the 259E and 261E waveform generators. And the audio range is from a very, very low LFO to a very high pitch, which I believe is G9. So that's a pretty high frequency. And it sounds really good, really easy to use. I use this oscillator, this module a lot, usually for drones with the slow modulation of the FM and such. So let's explore this a little bit. The two main things I want to do, so I'm not going to really go through creating a big patch. I just want to explore it a bit and give you an idea of the different ways that you can work with this module to get some interesting and different timbres. So I'm going to reset back to just the basic waveforms. Okay, bring those up into audio rate. There we go. Turn off the reverb for now. So both A and B, A is coming out of the left channel and B is coming out of the right channel. Both of them are sine waves. So I'll turn off B for a second. You can hear A, and then it goes sine to saw. And then B goes sine to square. I'll turn that down a bit. There we go. Let's see if I can match that up slightly. There we go. So now each oscillator has a mod type button that has 3 options: wave, amplitude, so wave shape, amplitude, and FM. And you can have all of them turned on, 2 of them turned on, 1 of them turned on. Basically, you can have all the combinations of the mod types turned on. And so each oscillator has that. So when I press on oscillator A, I turn on FM and increase the modulation index. It modulates oscillator B. When I turn on FM for oscillator B and increase the oscillator or the modulation index, it modulates A. So there's a cross mod going on here, which is pretty nice. And so I can increase the mod index on A to increase the amount of FM modulation, or FM, I should say. And then I can increase the modulation index on B to do the same to A. You can kind of hear the bell tone that is possible from frequency modulation right there, which is kind of neat. To put that in a sequence with a long reverb tail makes for some really interesting possibilities. So going into amplitude modulation, that is similar to what you experience in the 259E or the 261, or really the 261E. And that's modulating both amplitude and FM for both oscillators. So I'm going to make it go quiet because I turned up the modulation index. This is wave shape modulation on both. So that will quickly modulate between sine and saw and sine and square for the 2. And they're cross-modded, so it yields some really interesting effects. Then that's wave and FM, wave and amplitude, and all 3. So I'll leave that on. That's all 3 on oscillator B. There's that bell tone. I like that sound. So this, when I sweep the modulation index on B, it drastically changes the sound of A. So you can think of it as, in this example, oscillator A is the carrier and oscillator B is the modulator when I have the FM mod type turned on for A, and then oscillator B is the carrier and oscillator A is the modulator when I have FM turned on the mod type for B. So got all that? When you're using the module, it makes a lot more sense. I usually don't really think about all of the intricacies of synthesis types and such, carriers and modulators. I just start plugging things in and get the effects that I'm looking for. Okay, now I'm going to take a twisted waveform generator, and it's in twisted mode. And I'm going to take that output and put it into the FM input for oscillator A and turn that up. I'm going to turn off modulation there. So now as I sweep through MEMSCU, getting some interesting results. So all that's coming out of oscillator A. Now if I turn that down so we only hear B, oscillator A is modulating, is FMing oscillator B internally. So as I turn the MEMSCU knob, which will FM oscillator A, you can hear the impact on oscillator B. So let me turn that off. So now with FM mod type turned off, and as I sweep the MEMSCU knob, of course you don't hear anything because it doesn't have an effect on oscillator B unless that mod type is turned on. By the way, there's a video of me doing this, so if you're a Patreon subscriber, you'll see the video. Otherwise, we'll publish it in a couple of months for everybody. All right, so going back to here, bring that back in. So now if I turn on FM for oscillator B, just things really start to get crazy. And I'm not modulating the frequency, like the base frequency of either oscillator with any CV. I'm just leaving the pitch as they are. But as I start to turn those, they'll have this turning the oscillator frequency knob on B and then on A. Gonna get some Klaus Schultz time wind stuff going on there. So we can also use the 261E to FM on the FM input of oscillator B. I'm going to turn off the FM mod from A and just have an audio input. So now we'll put that 259E back into the FM input of A, turn on the wave shape modulation. I mean, it's just going nuts. I like that. Okay, so clearly there, as Todd Barton says, you're only as expressive as your control voltages. So if you use different CV sources to modulate, for example, modulation index, which controls the amount of modulation from the carrier or from the modulator, which CVs the amount of modulation from the oscillator to the other. So like if you're using oscillator A to modulate oscillator B, the modulation index will control how much modulation B will get from A. Whew, that's a mouthful. So you could CV that with all kinds of different sources to really interesting effects and interesting outcomes. Ditto for the wave shape itself, using external CV to modulate that, using, if you had a high amount of CV and a low amount of CV, it's sort of like in a square wave. Or, and you send that through a slew limiter and you're just kind of modulating the shape really slowly. You can do all kinds of really neat things and get unpredictable results, perhaps at the outset. But over time, as you really start to get a feel for how this module really works, you can kind of have in mind, an area of timbre or a range of timbres and dial those in pretty easily. Like I said earlier, I like to create bell tones with this and use them as drones, or dual gate them, and just the possibilities are endless. The other thing that I really love about the DPO, the 258E, is how well it tracks pitch. So to close out the segment, let's create a nice simple sequence. I'm going to use the 252E. I have two sequences, one 16-step that will go to oscillator B, and one 8-step that will go to oscillator A. So the first thing I need to do is tune the oscillators. So here's A. Okay, and so I will go to, that sounds pretty good actually. That's right at A3. Perfect. And perfect. So that's sounding like is about what we want. And now I'll go to oscillator B. And that sounds a little like maybe a D. Yep, it's a D. So we'll bring that up to an A. One octave lower than oscillator A. Okay, so here they are together. Perfect. All right, so I'm just going to, so here, let me see here. This is the waveform for A. I like it there, halfway, a little bit, almost halfway between sine and saw. And and then we'll play with that while the sequence runs. Okay, I'm going to turn on just a touch of reverb. And here we go. Okay, so on the 252E, I want the 8-step sequence to go through twice while the 16-step plays so. Okay, and we'll just increase the BPM a bit. So yeah, it tracks pitch really, really well. So just looking at oscillator A, yeah, that's pretty cool. So you can tell it's tracking really well as I go through the knobs here. Very nice. Cool. Yeah, so it's really nice and super easy to program because the 252E has CV values that are quantized, so 0.0, 0.1, and so on. So really easy to dial in, you know, a sequence in A minor. So it sounds really cool. Yeah, so this is a really fun module. You know, I've talked about it a few times on the show. It's pretty essential. It sits right in very well with the 259E and 261E oscillator modules from Buchla. And it also works great with my very wonky, weird zero oscillator, which is an FM oscillator that just goes into nutso pretty fast. So the 250E can do it all. It can go the whole gamut from quiet, dulcet, you know, nice, simple waveforms like these, which are just traditional, you know, saw and sine and sawtooth and square, and can quickly go into nuts. See?